I have with me His Excellency Mr. Leo Varadkar, who was the youngest ever Prime Minister, or the Taoiseach, as it is called in Ireland, and it's a great joy to have him here. Back to Mumbai, Mr. Varadkar, Excellency, how does it feel? You've been to Mumbai before.
Good evening, everyone, and great to be here this evening. I'm not going to sing for you, so I don't think I can best the last performance. But first of all, congratulations to CNBC-TV18 on 25 years, a really great milestone and one you should be proud of. I first came to Mumbai when I was a teenager, only 14 years old, but came back here as a medical student to work in KEM Hospital in my 20s. And since then, I've been here every 5 years. And that's mainly because my father is Maharashtrian from Konkan, between here and Goa, and my mother is from Ireland, but still have a lot of family here. And it's been really great to see India grow and change and develop so much in those years, and always a privilege to have a chance to visit. And I hope now that I'm less busy, it'll be more frequent.
But your Maharashtrian DNA, does something start throbbing when you breathe out clean air?
There are many, many great things about India. I think the diversity, the colours, the noise, the smells, the food, maybe not the air quality, perhaps not the best thing, but a very, very special place. I was just thinking when I arrived a few days ago, when I first arrived in India, in an airport in the 1990s, I think it was, how much infrastructure has improved. You know, an airport that is as good as any airport you would go to in the world. Used the new coastal road yesterday to get downtown. Great to see that working. Great to see the metro under construction. So a lot of progress, a lot of economic progress as well in particular. There's inequality too, and I think as a country becomes richer, that also becomes more obvious. But also I think it's great to see India being a country, as many people said today, that is much more respected in the world. And I know it may not have been, it may seem like a small thing, but you know, when India succeeded with its space program and landing a probe on the moon, that was something that really had people in Ireland and Europe, in other parts of the world, who didn't know about India's story really wake up. And really impressive to see that happen.
And you had quite a journey yourself, and you're barely 45 years old. You've been a politician, you've been a doctor, you've been the first mixed race Prime Minister, Taoiseach of Ireland. How has it been? Are you in awe of yourself?
As I say, pride comes before a fall, so I think it's never a good idea to be in awe of yourself. Good to work hard, as Mr. Murthy said, but also to be aware of your own limitations. But I've been very lucky as well. Had a good education, becoming a doctor, worked in that for 7 years, then went into politics, 20 years in Parliament, but spent most of that time at the cabinet table as a government minister, and then 7 of those 13 years as Prime Minister or Deputy Prime Minister, helping to lead a lot of changes in my country, in Ireland. And it's been a privilege to have that. It's hard work, it's also a bit of luck, that's the truth of life. But also hopefully have a lot more to offer. As you say, 45 years old and a lot more to do.
And while you were growing up, you were a proper Irish boy. So it was only when you became the Prime Minister did people start saying he's mixed race?
No, I think from my dark skin and my Indian surname, it's pretty obvious that I'm not a regular Irish person, for want of a better term. When I met President Obama for the first time, we had this conversation that both of us had the experience of growing up in a country that was almost entirely white, and that we were the people with the funny name, the tall, dark guys with the funny name. And we both had that experience. And of course, that shapes your politics and makes you want to know more about the world.
Are you taller than President Obama?
I think I'm slightly taller, but he's a tall man. He's skinnier, though. I've a little bit more weight on me. But but I was very much brought up in the culture in which I was raised, and that was something my parents wanted me to do. I am sorry that I never got to learn Hindi or Marathi. That would be an enormous asset now, but wasn't the case at the time. I think my father was just so busy, but always knew about the culture, knew about my family and relatives here in India, some of whom I'll get to meet tomorrow. And then also, as is always the case, India's food and music and films follow it all around the world. So,
and you probably got some of your nationalism from India. You're known as a very vocal nationalist for Ireland and even for Irish unification. Is it the impact of your Indian ancestry?
Well, I'm always careful about the word nationalism because it can mean different things in different contexts. And certainly, for me, it doesn't mean thinking that your country is superior or thinking any less of people of other nations. I'm very much an internationalist, but I do support the unification of Ireland, would like to see that happen. And my father's family, my Indian family, were very involved in the independence struggle here. So two of my uncles are recognized freedom fighters. They spent time in prison under British rule. And of course, both Ireland and India have that experience of being under British rule. For us, it was 700 years. I think you managed to remove them a bit quicker than us. But there is a strong connection between the two countries that goes back a very long time. So when Dr. Ambedkar was writing the Constitution for India, the Irish Constitution was one of the ones that he helped to use as his model. Nehru and De Valera, one of our first presidents, and Taoiseach, was in correspondence with each other. And then there's this literary connection between Tagore and Yeats, so it goes back a long time. And then, of course, you'll know the role that Irish priests and nuns had in education in
I'm
India,
a student of Irish brothers in school, and they did a great job. They used to pinch us very often, but the rest was okay.
That's against the law now, as you know, but I hope they gave you a good education.
But yes, excellent. We're going back to the freedom movement commonalities. I'm sure you know, Excellency, that our revolutionaries were also very close in touch with each other, and sometimes even after their death, because the Indian revolutionary Udham Singh and the Irish revolutionary Roger Casement were hung in the same prison, in Pentalwyn prison in London, and they were buried in the same unknown patch for years. So there is a lot in common that we have in that aspect itself.
And there's also the history of partition as well, which of course is a different story for India than it was for Ireland. But again, at the time of independence, the partitioning of Ireland between North and South happened shortly before that. So I think a lot of common historical experience.
Yes, Excellency, I think one of your great achievements has been making sure that the Good Friday Agreement, the spirit of Good Friday Agreement stays, and even through Brexit, you fought very hard to make sure that there is no land border or a customs border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So much so that a Tory MP, I think, said, "Oh, why does he behave like that? He's behaving like an Indian."
I think that was a compliment in that context, so happy with that. The history there, as I think some people will know, but maybe not everyone, is that the United Kingdom and Ireland joined the European Union together back in 1973. They decided to leave. We decided to stay. So we used the euro. We're in the European Union. But because Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland had to leave too, even though most people there didn't want to. And that created a real complication for us because we've had peace for more than 30 years. And that's based on an agreement where the two communities share power in Northern Ireland, and there isn't a border between North and South. People can move freely. Aside from the fact that the phone signal changes and the currency is different, you wouldn't necessarily know that you'd crossed a border. Some road signs are different, but that's all. And we were very keen that that shouldn't change, that the fact that Britain and really England, because it was English people, not Scottish people, who voted to leave, that wouldn't cause the North and South to become more distant, and we really didn't want there to be a hard border or physical infrastructure. So I had to work hard both with Prime Minister May and then Prime Minister Johnson and then later Prime Minister Sunak to make sure that we had an agreement in place to keep that border open, but also to allow people to move freely as well. It's not just about economics, it's not just about goods and trades and tariffs, it's people being able to get on a train in Dublin and get off in Belfast and do their work there and study there without there being any barriers.
You said quite recently that unification should not be an aspiration but an objective. Do you really see it happening, say, in our lifetime?
Well, I don't think it's inevitable. Certainly things like demographics and events like Brexit, I think make it more likely in the future than it is now. If you ask the younger people in Northern Ireland, they're more likely to be in favour of unification than older people. So that is, I think, the direction of travel. But it isn't inevitable. And I often give the example of Australia becoming a republic. They had a referendum there, I think 25 or 30 years ago. They didn't ask the right question, they didn't do the right preparations, and it was defeated. And now they can't decide if they're going to have another referendum or not. So for it to happen in Northern Ireland, there has to be a referendum both north and south, and it has to pass both north and south. So I think if it's something that we want, and it is something that I want, we have to work towards it and lay the groundwork and make sure that we're able to answer satisfactorily any questions or doubts that people may have.
Referendums are dangerous things because it is rumored that when David Cameron asked, was eating a pizza somewhere when he got the idea of a Brexit referendum, and they haven't lived it down.
Yeah, well, they're particularly dangerous if you lose them. And I think when David Cameron decided that, he was put under pressure by his own party to do it, by hardliners in his party. I think he thought, one, it might never happen, and two, if it does happen, that I'll win it. Yeah. And it was a gamble that failed, unfortunately, and created, I think, a lot of difficulties for them economically, and then difficulties for their neighbours. But it was their decision, and we have to respect the decisions that people make in a democracy.
But Excellency, you made a very brave choice for a referendum, and it comes to mind now when we see the campaign that Kamala Harris ran on the issue of abortion. There was a case in Ireland when an Indian origin dentist, Savita Halapawar, she lost her life because of the local laws against abortion. And I believe you pushed for the referendum and got a change of constitution. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a very, very sad story. And I know in India, the right to abortion has been there, I think, since independence. It's not a particularly political issue here. But in Ireland, abortion was illegal in almost all circumstances. And that law was made even stronger in 1983 when Ireland was a very conservative country. And we put into our constitution a provision preventing any government from liberalising the law. And over time, I think attitudes changed. But one of the things that really drove that was a very, very sad story of an Indian dentist. She'd come to live in Ireland with her husband, and her pregnancy was ending. She was miscarrying. The baby wasn't going to survive, but the doctors who were in charge at the time made the decision not to end the pregnancy or delayed ending the pregnancy because they were concerned about the strictness of our laws, or what they say, the chilling effect of our laws. And I think we're seeing some stories like that now emerge out of America, where states have made abortion effectively illegal. But it really touched the hearts of Irish people. There were murals and pictures of her put up in our cities. Women felt very, very strongly about this issue in particular, but men too. And I made the promise then in 2017 that we'd put it to a vote, that we'd allow people to decide whether or not to lift the ban on abortion. And we made that change, and it was a big result. It was 68% yes for changing our laws. And it wasn't just the cities, it was the rural areas voted yes as well, which we didn't necessarily expect, and older people as well as younger people. So it was a very significant change, and I think puts us in a very different place, I think, to other countries where where those rights are being rolled back.
Yes, and if we mention Kamala Harris, how can we not mention Donald Trump? Did you see it coming?
I always thought it was a possibility. To be honest, I didn't think it would happen. Certainly going back to the events of January 6th, I thought that would be the end of Mr. Trump's, or President-elect Trump's political career. And then he's obviously made this great comeback in the last year or two, which has been extraordinarily impressive, and now won those elections. So I always thought it was a possibility, but in my heart and in my gut, I felt that President Harris would win on the day, but clearly did not. And again, it's for the people of America to decide who their president is, and we have to accept and respect that result, and a very clear result on his part. And I always say that, you know, if you don't respect the people that a country elects, you're not respecting those people, and I think we need to respect that and try and work with them as best we can. And we did, of course, in his first term, although I think the second term is going to be different.
Is it going to be more rocky than the first two?
I think it probably will be, because, you know, the first time when President Trump won, he didn't win the popular vote. It was a relatively weak mandate. This was 48-50. It's closer than people may think. It was not a landslide, but it's still a very clear mandate. Also, as the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court,
yes,
many are his appointees. So that's a big change too. And then also in the Republican Party, there were a lot of people who didn't agree with him or would resist him, like John McCain and Mitt Romney and Lynn Cheney. And all those people are gone now. He's very much in control of his party, and you can see from the appointments made to the new cabinet. So I think the second administration, Trump 47, will be more radical and will be able to get more of their agenda through than Trump 45. So it's something we have to be prepared for and be aware of around the world.
So are we going to actually see mass deportations of millions and 60% tariffs on China and 20% on everybody else, including Europe?
It'll be interesting to see how the mass deportations play out. You know, all countries carry out deportations, including America. It's an easier thing to say than do. You know, you can't just leave people at a border. The country that they come from has to be willing to take them back. So it may turn out to be a difficult promise to fulfill, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in America. On trade, I think President Trump means what he says, that there will certainly be the threat of tariffs on other countries, and in many cases there will be tariffs. But that, of course, means there'll be a response. So products being imported into America will be more expensive for American consumers, and American products will become more expensive for us to import. And there are potential opportunities there, I think, particularly for countries like India. So if President Trump puts up trade barriers to the rest of the world and to Europe, at the same time Europe is trying to de-risk but not decouple from China, there's a real potential for India there, I think. And somebody was saying before, earlier on, how India is not yet the factory of the world, but it could potentially become the factory of the world, particularly when it comes to Europe, because if we're moving away from China and America's moving away from us, there's a big opportunity there for Indian manufacturing and Indian companies as well, which is why it would be great to have a trade agreement between the EU and India. I know we've been talking about that forever, and because I think of the bureaucracies on both sides, it's been hard to make it happen. But even a basic light one to get it started would be. Well,
you have India Inc. here, Excellency. So what would you like India to do to be more present in Europe? I know we are present in Ireland. Could you tell us if that's been a success, and what are we not doing enough?
Well, I think, speaking as an Irishman, we now have a very big Indian community in Ireland. We have a skills deficit, and there are a lot of Indian people with skills, and they're filling big gaps in our economy and big gaps in our public services, and we're very grateful for that. And also a lot of students too, who then choose to stay for a bit longer. I would like to see more Indian companies invest in Ireland. There have been a few. Emphasis, for example, Wipro, the software company, TCS has a big operation in Ireland, and just in the last year, they won the contract to run our new public pension system. So, a very huge contract, and amazing to see an Indian company win that. But we'd like maybe more Indian companies and Indian business leaders even just to come to visit Ireland and to see what we have to offer, because it's English speaking, because there's a very positive business culture, because we're in the Euro and in the Eurozone. I think if anyone is thinking of having a base in Europe, Ireland is one of the best choices that you can make, and that's beyond the advantages that exist around tax and so on. So we'd love you to be in touch with our consulate here in Mumbai. Our consul is here, and our IDA have offices here too, and just have Ireland on your agenda, and we'd love to have you visit and see what's possible.
But are the walls not actually coming up? If you're talking of tariffs, you're talking of protectionism, people are becoming more, immigration is becoming more difficult. So is this going to be a one-way street, or do you still have hope that we'll go back to a globalist world?
I have a lot of hope. My politics is liberal, it's internationalist. I believe in free trade, free enterprise, the free movement of people. And I know there have been setbacks in recent years. But I strongly believe that the arc of history bends towards progress, as somebody said. But of course, there'll be setbacks on the road. But we shouldn't think that history has ended. There will be more elections all over the world in the next couple of years, and the results of those elections are not determined. But I do think those of us who have a liberal and open view of the world will have to listen to what people are saying when they don't vote for our candidates, better understand what their concerns and fears are. For some people, it's change happening too quickly. For other people, it's change that they're opposed to. But we have to understand those issues and try to convince people. And that's, I think, a challenge for all of us.
But if I can push you a bit on this, a lot of Europe is going right. In many countries, you have right-wing leadership, and at the same time, you're adding this whole security issue. If the United States withdraws from Europe, what happens? Is everybody going to start looking inwards, start preparing their own defenses, or are they going to abandon Ukraine in the process?
I am very, very worried about Ukraine. I know people around the world have different perspective about what's happening in Ukraine. Some people see it as a proxy war between the West and Russia. Some people blame NATO expansion for the war in Ukraine. I have a totally different view, because I asked the Ukrainians what do they think and what future do they want for their own country. I allowed a Ukrainian refugee to stay in my house for 9 months after the war. And what I see in Ukraine is a small country next to a big country, a bit like Ireland is next to Britain. And that big country wants to be able to tell it what to do, wants to have it in its sphere of influence. And I think the Ukrainian people should be allowed to decide for themselves what their future is. If it's in the European Union, if it's in NATO, it's not for America or Russia to decide that. They should decide it for themselves. And I would be concerned that there could be a change of policy now from the US, and Ukraine won't have the support of the US. I think that will then trigger the European Union and European countries to work together and be stronger, because we have relied on the United States for our security and our defense for 75 years, and we can't assume that anymore. Even if it's not President Trump, there'll be another president after him, another one after that. And for too long, Europe has relied on the United States for its own security, and we now have to do that and do that for ourselves. And one of the things I did as Prime Minister, Ireland is not in NATO, but we brought Ireland into the European Common Security and Defence Policy, which is called PESCO, and I think we're going to need more cooperation on that level.
Well, you resigned as Prime Minister after being so successful. And when you resigned, people likened you to Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister. And she said she ran out of fuel. Did you run out of fuel?
No, I think it was for different reasons. And I know Jacinda Ardern quite well. She was one of the few people I told a few months beforehand that I was thinking of stepping down, because it's still relatively unusual for politicians to resign before they have to. for me, I was in it for a long time. 20 years in Parliament, 13 in government. If I'd run again, I would have been looking for a third term as Prime Minister, a fourth term for my party. And I wasn't loving it and enjoying it in the way that I was before. And that's me being very honest about that. And the other reason as well is that I do think when you make changes, when you do things in politics, your political capital diminishes over time. And mine was certainly starting to diminish. And it's very hard to replenish that. You can, but very hard to do. And I took a decision that for my party and for a lot of our candidates, some of whom are personal friends, that we might be able to do better under a new leader. And there is evidence that that's been happening. Since I stepped down, we won the local and European elections in Ireland. But it's very hard to know when to go, because there's always another project you want to finish, or another thing you want to finish off.
And now that you left, you've done Prime Minister, you've done everything. The last inevitable question, what next?
I'm not sure, but I'm going to spend most of the next year really doing a few different things, and then maybe decide what I like and what I want to do next. I definitely don't want a full-time job.
Well, you obviously want to keep it a secret, so we won't push you on that. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Excellency. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, thank you, Dr. Varadkar and Mr. Sarna, for that conversation. I hope you all are enjoying the day here.